Well, good evening, everybody. We're going to do a deep dive tonight on what we had hoped was going to be our annual exercise where we could do a new partnership venture with the Seattle Fire Department. But because COVID sort of put us all on different plans this year, we knew that the exercise was going to happen. ACS was, the Auxiliary Communication Service Group, was going to participate in their virtual way because they can do that as a radio team. And I was invited to go to my local battalion to take notes and see how this happened so I could better convey to the hubs really what their current plan is so that we can have future discussion on how we can mesh into what their response plan is. So now let me yank down the record sign. And so I am just going to jump right in. We're not going to do any introductions tonight. Oh, you know, and of course, once I close the, you know, like I'm having one of those days, so hang on, let me get it back up. Okay, now let's share the screen. And now let's not share the screen. All right, well, hang on, everybody, while I figure this out again. What I did was I did a little test practice session and I probably closed the file accidentally. There we go. That teaches me for practicing. So I'm not going to put it into presentation mode because this was the briefing material that was actually used by the fire department, and they did a lot of fly in the words, and so it'd take me 300 clicks to get through the 15 or 20 slides. So we're just going to put them up one at a time and I'll talk to the major points. So this exercise was for 4 different, the fire groups are broken up into different shift groupings, and so they had to do this exercise on 4 different days to capture all the personnel assigned to the fire department. So I was in on the 22nd. So, and then I was at Battalion 7, which is out here in West Seattle. So what you're going to see here is their briefing material for their different companies and battalions. So this is kind of the overview. One of the things for the newer hub captains who have not seen us put together a drill, we follow the same pattern that a lot of the incident command groups do, which is when you put together a drill, you have your objectives defined and you keep track of how you met those objectives, and then you do an after action. So between this fire department presentation and the Auxiliary Communication Service after action, you're going to see all those different parts of it. This part of the drill is in their considerations. They started with kind of a preamble of what they have been focused on over the past couple of years to try and get their concept of operations to be smoother and efficienter. And what we'd always heard was they do what's called a windshield survey. You get out in the brigs and you actually drive a predetermined arterial-based route which looks for critical infrastructure, and you radio that back in so that the battalion can start making decisions. So what they're talking about here, and I'll use my cursor to kind of highlight the areas that they were interested in really focusing on, is keeping track of all the incidents that the rigs saw when they were out on their simulated drill, and then using a pull model rather than a pushing the information in so that it's an overwhelm. So you'll see how the pull model got worked at the battalion. They did a couple of things for beta testing this year. I'm not going to cover all of them. One that pops up is the 2 at the bottom, use of satellite phones. That was kind of interesting. And then working with the civilians groups, which is us and ACS. And their note is they have not updated their official at the stations annex yet. They wanted to finish this drill and incorporate any lessons learned. So I'm going to pause after each slide and go, is there any questions? Okay. So they set baselines just like everybody does. What are the assumptions going into the drill? Seattle Fire Department is going to be under-resourced, meaning that there's just going to be, so during a Cascadia level exercise, which this was based on, they're going to be under-resourced. There's going to be more issues for them to work than they have people. And they have to create an infrastructure to gather and organize the information so that they can make the right priority decisions. And that is, for them, a huge culture shift, because their normal operation is incident command. It's a very hierarchical structure, and you go all the way from the top down. And so this consideration for them breaks it into separate battalions that operate more independently. And then also recognizing that people are going to have different roles, and you'll see some of these roles that they assign as they go out. So as I walk through this, we're going to see three different levels, but I'm really only going to focus mostly on the battalion and company levels. RMC stands for Resource Management Center, and that is the fire department's almost equivalent of the EOC. It's where all the battalions and companies converge their requests or understanding of what resources are available, and they make master centralized dispersal decisions when they can. But we're not going to talk much about them because I didn't get to see it and I don't understand it as in a detail where I think I can confidently talk to it. So these were the new concepts that, and we'll come back to get my fingers off the thing. We'll come back to some of the concepts. Slow is fast. I mean, they repeated that multiple times in this briefing, and I watched it in the exercise. If you're not going slow, you're going slow. So it was really trying to get people to pay attention to the pace of how they're going to respond so that they can make a good job of this. We mentioned pull communications, tracking incidents. They were testing out how many people they would need in the battalion to staff the operations that you're going to see. And then they had some discussion on the RMC. Any questions about this? So
this is Gabrielle.
Yeah, Gabby.
No, Gabrielle, yeah. Could you say just one more sentence about the slow is fast, what that means to them? Does that just mean slow down and don't rush?
Yep.
That's all it means? Okay.
And the true example is the battalion I was at, what they do, they'll call on an engine in particular order because they have this cycle of communication set up. And that guy was so jazzed up that he was spewing his information. The guy trying to capture it couldn't keep up. He wouldn't unkey his microphone. And so he went through the three things they said, report your top 3 issues that you're observing. And he didn't break in between each one to verify that they caught what he was saying. He went all the way to the end and they said, nope, we got to start all over. Go back and start and stop in between each one. They had to kind of set the pace for him. And that was really important because everybody's listening on the radio and they were all frozen for the 3 or 4 minutes the guy took to do his first, thing. And then they all had to wait for him to back up and start over and do it again. So the radio operator, we complimented him. He really set a good pace. And once he said, nope, I am going to control you. Here's what I want you to do. Pause after each one, verify that we've got it. So that's what slow is fast means. Efficiency. Anybody else? Okay. This is a horrible slide because this assumes you can understand what's going on. Fortunately, it's broken down. So this is kind of their overall picture. And I'm only going to pause on it long enough to say the EOC is separate from their resource management center. And so there is a communication path that has to happen here. They are not co-located. So for every incident that's going on, it's going from a company to a battalion, to their RMC, and then to the EOC. So the EOC, who may need this information for other purposes, is the fourth in line to get the information. So you can see how clarity and conciseness of information is really important. That is a key lesson for us. If we are going to pass messages up through the fire department, for example, let's say they stop and they say, what have you heard? We need to know. We've got to make sure it's the same concise level that we're passing to the EOC through ACS. So it just means there's many places where we can have communications breakdowns. Just have some consistency and clarity about what you're communicating. So really what I'm going to do is focus down here. They put in some slides that are going to walk us through how the company and battalion run as though there's an earthquake. So here's the battalion, and they have companies associated. So in West Seattle, it's easy for me to do that because this is a geographic thing. I think there's 7 different companies out here, and they're all labeled, you know, it's engine 11, it's ladder 27. I don't have all mine memorized, but so each of those companies has a name, and that is associated with the equipment that's going to be doing these windshield exercises. So, you know, the signal went and they went off into their routine. So they're, just so you know how they are going to step through what they do, they account for all their personnel. You know, is somebody still down at the grocery store? You know, where is everybody? Get them on the, you know, radio, make sure you've found everyone. Secure and inventory the station because they're about to leave it. And I was at one where the battalion stayed behind, but all the other working people were out on the road doing the inventory. They'll have someone assigned to assume that they're going to be operating on their own for a while. And so that means get all this different pieces of equipment or their food and clothing stood up and ready for the firefighters to start going into 24-hour shifts. So we have to remember that they've got some additional, we need to be ready for a long run rather than just jump and go. Some of this I didn't hear some of these specific things, so I don't know some of this, but the recon teams are the ones who are going to go out and they're sitting in their rig, ladder 11, and they're driving the route and they're taking notes as they go. And so they've been assigned to go past schools, past critical infrastructure, cross bridges, and take notes. And so when the battalion headquarters contacts each of the companies, I think they did it numerically. So 11 it was 11, then 27, then 36. So you knew what order you should have been coming up in. And so number 11 was going to be on the hook for the first call where the battalion headquarters said, you know, all right, give me your first priority. And I don't know what the scale of, you know, unless there's an urgent need, firefighter in danger, what I assume that means. But the radio guy would go, okay, ladder 11, you know, please transmit your first 3 priorities. And they would do their priorities. And then they would go, okay, we got it all. Next is 27, you know, transmit your 3 priorities. And they'd go on through that. And then after getting through all the companies, they would start back with ladder 11 and go, now give us your next 3. And so that went on for the entire cycle of their initial windshield survey, which took approximately an hour. It takes the routes are designed to be driven in a half an hour. And, you know, with real street traffic, it was probably taking a little bit longer. And then you just have this lag of, you know, everybody finishes within half an hour, but you still have about 15 minutes of radio catch up. Any questions on that?
I have a question, Cindy. What you just said about they're assuming that they can do their windshield survey in a half an hour. I'm assuming they might run into roads that they can't use.
Right.
So I'm just surprised at that time frame that they've given themselves.
Well, what it really means is they didn't. It's more like, how do I say it? They figure out where all the critical infrastructure is. They divide it up among the stations, and they try to keep it to at least to no more than a half an hour, so that they can cover the widest area. So you have to draw a map somewhere. And so if a block is, you know, got a building down in it, they're going to note that, but they may have to detour it and or go around it to get back out on the arterial. So somehow they have to have a map and say, this is the critical infrastructure stuff we need to look at, the schools, the whatever they consider. But half an hour seemed to them like the best response window, because in that first half hour, nothing's happening. Everybody's trying to figure it out anyway. Mark, if you've got any, I did invite the 2 battalion liaisons, but you know, it was like, I know coming to an evening meeting is probably not what they want to do. But if Mark, if you've got any insights. Please share.
Well, I think you've outlined it just right on. I mean, what I've always heard is that it's to get around their route, and they have a predetermined route as efficiently as possible. And the hard part, when you think about it, is not stopping for some of the obvious emergencies, which would be really hard to do. I mean, the way I understand it, their marching orders are to complete this before you do anything else.
Yep.
Was that what you picked up in the briefing?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, they're still talking about it because, you know, that's really hard. And so there is some discussion about, can they leave any key people back to do the actual start responding even faster, and who would they send out in the battalion headquarters vehicle? But they're not at that. They only have, you know, every station's only got 4 to 6 people, and they're not sending out the medical people on these routes. Medical people are staying in place waiting for assignment. So you don't have a lot of equipment out being able to be running around. So
It's just good to know that, because I always thought the windshield survey might take hours. So
no, well, you know, they're shooting for a half an hour, and it clearly for us, what that means is the sooner we learn what those routes are or understand that it's just arterials, if you've got a major senior center and it's not in an arterial, that might be someplace a hub sends someone to right away to go get that information. And just like we line up our priority messages, same thing, you know, maybe there's assumptions we can make about fire department already saw this area on their survey. We're really worried about this school or this other. And if they say, yeah, you're right, we don't go by that school, then we might have a way to write a better usage of the volunteers that show up, like those scouts. They go find out what's going on down at the senior center there. Anybody else? So
I would
this
think
is,
that you know, it depends on what they run into.
yeah, you know, they didn't actually share the routes with me, and maybe we'll get to see that at some point. We certainly can invite our liaison folks to follow-up sessions, just like we did with Chad. We sort of went, how would we do this? We kind of got our own questions together, and then we had a much more useful discussion. They don't have to sit through the briefing. We can just go right to, can we look at our books in our neighborhoods to find out where you're really going to go? I'm not sure I'm ready to push that with them yet, but that would be an obvious next step. So what you're looking at here is this card is exactly what they used. And it wasn't like, you know, the little small card, and it's got a little insert that goes on the top of it to give updated information. So those hubs that have adopted the half sheet of paper, you're still bigger than what they're using. So what happens is the ladder 11's driving around, and they go, okay, we're set up. We've got our battalion headquarters equipment box open, the white markers out, the forms out, the map icons up, we're ready to go. And so it's like, okay, company 11, read us your first 3 priorities, pause in between each one so that we can make sure we've captured the information. So they do this just like the hubs do. This was B7, and incident 1 was 001. And then over the radio operator was sitting next to a scribe, and the scribe was listening to the information, and they were really reading off what needed to go in the card. So same system that we use on an ICS 213, you know, transmit in the order that the reader or the message taker, radio operator, is going to be hearing your information, so that it is easily captured and complete when you're done. So company, where are you? What are you looking at? And actions and needs. And I don't know that I captured close enough pictures to really see what they were saying, but you know, gonna need evacuation team, gonna need an IMAP team, gonna need medical supplies. You know, I assume that's what they were putting in there. This was really way more an exercise of how's the information flowing, you know, not so much the validity of is every address perfect. So they do their 3, then they go on to the next 3. Down here is a little clock, and I'm going to show you this later, but they are trying to establish a cycle of communications. that says 15 minutes, I'm going to make it up because I don't know it exactly, but 10 minutes into, earthquake happens at 12:30. So 15 minutes into that is when we start these cycles. And so that the battalions and the companies can predict when they're going to be called on to speak. Very complicated, very hard to keep track of. And it is not aligned with the top of the hour. It's aligned with X minutes after the incident started. So we're not going to pay hardly any attention to it. But when you see that, it's them saying this is when this piece happens in this communication cycle. Questions? So here's some target locations. So those must have been some of the ones on the on one of the routes.
I was curious if they said anything with their target locations. I know we talked a little bit about they may have some priority areas they go to. Was there any mention about time of day of this incident and their priorities? Like, do their priorities change depending on the time of day? You don't maybe need to drive by a school if it's midnight.
Yeah, now I don't know. I don't think they can deviate from the route. I'm pretty sure of that. It would just be not taking it. And remember, I didn't get to sit through the briefing. I just got the slides. So that may have come up, but I know they have to follow the route, but they probably are going, you don't have to spend much time at the school, but you probably better spend more time at the senior rest home when wherever he's sleeping. So good question.
Yeah, in the example, it does have the elementary school not checked for night.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
hardly see it on my screen, so okay.
Yep. Yeah, I have to get right up with my bifocals to see that. And it was amazing. When I was listening to the radio operator and the scribe and the battalion officer, the battalion chief had a lieutenant, like a second-hand person. Those first three people were listening and they were going like, that's not at that address, or, they were able to really, they knew their area. And then in the middle of all this, a real world call came in and they were like, they knew exactly where their piece of equipment they needed to send to it was, so that they could make a decision on who to move to that. So these people really know their territory. I was super impressed by that. I'm going to move me over there. So this is sort of what the operations centers looked like at the battalion. You had radio and a scribe, and then you had people putting them up on a map, as each ladder called in an address. The address was captured. This guy put it on the map and associated it with the incident number, and then they moved it into some prioritization boards. And so we'll be seeing that next. I do not know what FIT crew stands for, sorry, but it's the battalion chief and probably the four people. My chief was a woman, so I'm going to end up saying she all the time. So it's probably the crew that was supporting her. So they have this room in the station I was at. That is the battalion headquarters for the West Seattle companies, and so it already had everything they needed right there. It had the peninsula-wide map. It had several whiteboards, and they just quickly turned those into prioritization and logistics boards. And so everybody's, by the time I got there, everybody's sort of sitting in their places, kind of tapping their pencils, waiting to go. And this is where they begin contacting per the comm stations to collect the status. And then the battalion headquarters during that cycle is specifically contacted by that resource management center saying, okay, you're X number into this, you're X number of minutes into this exercise. You've probably gotten, at the timing it was set at, you've probably gotten 20 incidents called into you. You're through your first cycle of all your equipment. What are your top 3 priorities? And they asked her actually for her first 5. And so she had to take all that information coming in, map it, figure out what was the most important. And they were using color coding. So if it was fire, it got highlighted yellow. And if it was collapse, it was highlighted a different color. And so she was able to stand back and look at her board and kind of go, okay, the fires and the collapses. And she was shuffling them, and we'll see those boards in action. And then once she transmitted in her top 5, then they started in on, what are your resources that you happen to be asking for? So questions on this one? I'm hoping they got good pictures. Okay, this is the good picture one. So this is following the bouncing ball. Here was the radio operator and the scribe, and they were putting it up on a shelf, and the map guy came over and picked it up and walked it over here and put it on the map. They have little kind of like arrows so that you could, particularly point right to the address, and so you could see clusters starting to develop, and you could see out of the, one-offs on the routes that they got. And I honestly don't know how they gave them the index. Was it a sheet of paper that, as they drove the route, like, okay, when you get to this intersection, open this envelope and here's your surprise. Mark shaking his head, but it must have been something like that. But that was what was generating this new information to be called in. So the map guy after he retrieved the incident card from the scribe, just like I said, was writing the incident number. He did really good at keeping sequential. He also had and I didn't see it in here, it was under his own initiative, but he had a log where he was also keeping track, so he knew what the next number was. He wasn't having to, run around and go, oh, did I already do 8? I lost track. So that was really good. Then they gave it here, and this was different in this board, and they'll show some other pictures, but they just started slapping up what was coming in from the ladders under. So ladder 11, they would put the 5 or 6 things that ladder 11 called in, and then engine 36, and then number 37. So that as they started coming in, she could stand there and look at them and start going, and they called it a risk benefit analysis, but it's just like any decision somebody has to say, what is the severity of it? If I'm going to make it up, bomb in a school at night, no people expected, not high priority, so they're going to put that, and she was marking some stuff low priority just because from the information given from the field, it was not going to be something that was going to be one of their top things to respond to, given the other stuff that was coming in. So there was kind of like this original prioritization staging area. And then as she made her decisions, she moved him to the next board over, which was divided up, and you'll be able to see it, into level 1, level 2, and level 3. And so she was populating the level 1 high priority stuff. And then she didn't populate everything and have to move cards all the time. She waited until the full cycle was done before she made her final decisions. Any questions on this? It's a pretty good visual. I think this is just kind of repetitive. Who's doing what? Oh, and then here's that little update card. So here you can see where it's got the same top information, but you never lost your incident number and you never lost the action and needs. Oh, excuse me. I think the address. It's supposed to go so that the address doesn't have to get rewritten. But you can, as the situation develops, maybe a building went on into collapse, or now the building is now on fire, or, oh, yay, an aftershock has created a landslide and we've got, some other conditions. They can put this on and they just staple it right to it. So it can build up and change over time without having to redo a card. So here's those cards as, oh, look, this is actually my station. So engine 11, this was their training material, but it's exactly what it looked like in the real thing, except, they had more under each one of them. And then they would pull it off of here and put it over into the level 1. Questions? So my question for them was, at the end of this, I went, okay, so you got a bunch of level 1s. She started picking them off of, once she started picking them off of here and then assigning them. So they really kind of went there. We need another board where this is the report board, but you may need a ladder truck over here where they don't have a ladder truck, so she's going to start moving crews around. So she needed a another board, so that as the level ones were getting actually assigned out and worked, they could track that it was a level one, but who is actually working it. So there's kind of like, it was very interesting they couldn't just, this didn't seem to suit her because she's like, I don't understand where my assets are when I'm looking at a level one, level two, level three. So they go to a different, they go into the actual response mode, which we never have to do in just organizing the information. And
So in
during,
this example, the left side is the incoming information, basically.
yeah.
This is
So
what those various engines are reporting back.
yes. So the map guy would map it, but over here, this is going under each piece of equipment that reported it. Then they pull it off of here, and regardless of who reported it, what are the highest priorities? And then, so she's sitting there and now she's got to make assignments. She's got 12 level ones and 35 level two and level threes. She's got to get those 12 items assigned to someone. And so she wanted that in a visual way. I do not know how they normally track who's out on what calls, if that's a visual system or if that's something that they use. They got to have a system online to do it, but she preferred to have a visual way to do it during the earthquake.
Yeah, I would think you'd want to be visual on paper and whiteboard because you can't rely on a tablet computer.
Right,
Seems
right.
like she could just draw a line halfway down the board with the F11 and F26, and then she could assign below that.
I will pass that back to Cody. Okay. Any other questions? So by the end of the hour, she's transmitted at least twice back into the RMC, and they had an inject in the middle of that she was supposed to use something. Their 800 megahertz system, and they got an inject partway through that the megahertz system went down, and she was going to have to switch to satellite radio. So that was interesting because they don't use satellite radio that often. And I guess I was there on the second day of the exercise because they were saying, well, my liaison was saying, well, on the first day, satellite telephone was working really well. Today, we're having a lot of connectivity issues. And so they had a comms officer there just to help her make sure she understood all the equipment because they don't use it that often. It's part of the exercise. And it was a good thing he was there because there was a lot of troubleshooting going on because it wasn't working the first time she picked it up to use it. So this again is, we may have a battalion chief out there who is cut off from the center of action, and they're just having to make their own decisions on what they're going to respond to, and only with what they have available because they can't get through to ask for additional help. And they may be, as we've always heard on the city, they may be asked to send their crews to some place that's got worse problems than, their existing station. So that's the point of what the RMC does. It does that level loading across the city. So
Cindy, what does RMC stand for again?
Resource Management Center.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and they are separate from the EOC, but they work right with the EOC. The EOC is going, okay, fire, what's going on? Where are you at? Do you need anything? That's EOC's job, is to say, are we needing to elevate requests to the county or to the state, or do you need anything from the departments? And this is probably a good place to answer this. So let's say there is an area and 10 apartment buildings the people are all dumped out on the street and the apartment buildings are collapsed and on fire, and it's clear we're going to have people who need shelter. And so the EOC has got people in it working for Health and Human Services who are going to be trying to find out as soon as possible, what do we think the shelter needs are? So this information that is coming up the company, battalion, resource management center needs to get over to the EOC so that those departments can start doing what they need to do to respond with shelters, blankets, food, whenever they can get it stood up. So you can see how all this information, whether we pump it in through ACS straight to the EOC, or it's observed for the fire department, or they stop at a hub and go, what's going on? You know, it's all trying to get to the places where the departments are interfacing and going up to the state if they need additional resources like that, like hand puppets here. Any other comments, questions on this? Like I said, I'm going to skip this because it's got so many acronyms. I went, okay, fine. It's just them trying to say this is how our process works. And that's a picture of what it is. It's a separate building. It's not down at the downtown fire station co-located with the EOC, someplace else in the city, but nearby. And pretty quick, I did ask,
That's where it is.
Oh, it is in there? Is it
Yeah.
upstairs?
Yeah, it is. It's upstairs of the fire station.
Oh,
It's-
okay.
And it's like across from us. And yeah, I mean, it's you have to go out a different door, but it is right there.
Okay. And I did ask, like, how long does it take to stand up? And they said the people who are assigned to this almost all work in that downtown core. So it would be pretty quick to be up and running. It's just whether or not they could actually communicate with the outside battalions. And this is the same deal, people are scribing. Okay, this is where your head blows up, and I am not going to go through this very much other than, just to sort of go, they got clocks and dials and, communication cycles and, so here at 0.00, this is what is happening, and 10 minutes into it, these things are going to happen, and 15 minutes into it, this is going to happen. So it's, I haven't heard their after action to say, wow, was this a problem? Did everybody get confused? So I'm going to go to the highlights, and then what we'll do after that is we'll go through the ACS, their view of how the exercise went. So here we are back at the slogan, slow is fast. The more deliberate you are, the better they think they can respond and save lives and property. Every hierarchical organization has to beat this into people that just because you're, fire officer X doesn't mean that on the day of a disaster, you're not going to be doing 2 other jobs. It's okay. We need to do that. But if you're going to do the job, you need to know the job. So don't push the information. Make sure that the battalion or the RMC is pulling the information. And that's going to be hard for them because they're going to be sitting there just like we are on sometimes big things, and you want to shove it, but if they're not ready to receive it, it could get lost, it could get confused. So, waiting for ACS to, have the sectors call us and find out what level of information are they ready to take? Is it going to be a big glut, or do they just need us to carve off the top priorities? And we have to keep reprioritizing in the interim cycles to make sure the highest stuff stays up at the top. Keeping track of their incident numbers, that's really important because that map is tied to that incident number. And if they send people to the wrong places, it's going to be a problem. And then, they do make sure, just like we have to remember, if you're going to be down in a hub, go to the hub only after your family is ready to be okay without you. Ron and I have an agreement, it's like, you're on your own, but most people don't have that kind of FEMA people in their family where it's just automatic to be like that. So make sure you have a plan and you have a communication so that you can show up as a hub captain or as a volunteer at the hub and know that your family's okay. And then, so I'm waiting to hear what their feedback is. They're putting together their after action, and they said they would share that, but I don't have anything yet. So any questions before I leave this presentation and go on to ACS?
I was curious. So when you were talking about the updates and the update card,
Mhm.
I was curious how that whole process works, because if they're doing a drive-by within 30 minutes, who is giving these updates, or I guess, how are they receiving them? Is this still in the drive-by, or is this coming from 911, or both? Like, assuming we have this earthquake, maybe some comms are down, maybe it's not the big Cascadia, they're probably still going to use this process, right? So was there any mention of how they're like integrating 911 calls into this other process they're trying to use, and like bringing and marrying those things together? Or
Yeah, I have 2 answers to that. One will be, I don't know, but in the fire area, if, you know, they're always in communication back to battalion. So if a ladder goes out and they're starting on something that was just a collapse, and then there's an aftershock that causes a fire, the company will call in the updates. So that is the one way I knew that updates would get in. And that's what they said to me is when during the response, if it needs to be updated, they'll be responding. If it's just up on the board and it's one of those low priority ones that they haven't assigned anybody to, I don't know, because, and that was where I kind of could speculate that if you get a call to 911 and they go, we need to push this out to the battalion chief because there's a big deal going on. She's got the address. She can look over there and she can go, oh yeah, we already heard about that address, and go retrieve the card and then do the update. But I imagine that process is super slow unless it's a big update.
Yeah, and you know, the part of this whole thing for doing this exercise is so that they can operate autonomously and be able to do their own information gathering and their own dispatching within the limitations. You know, a lot of what the city is doing right now in this exercise, in this earthquake planning cycle, is accepting that there's going to be isolation on a major earthquake, and they need to be able to operate within these geographical areas. So that's what this thing is really testing. If there was 911 calls, that would be great, and they could share the information. But really the idea here is this autonomous operation.
Other questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that. Oh, good. This one wasn't hard to find. So this is a PDF, so I'm just going to have to share it like it is here. So this is from the ACS team. So I did not talk hardly at all about what they were doing. So you're going to see also how ACS develops their objectives, and they walk through what their plan was and then their after action observations. And so this was the first test to develop that working relationship to see how much the radio team could help in identifying damage reports. I got to move these. I got to move the pictures again. You know, here probably I could have started with this one, major earthquake. Here goes the windshield surveys. EOC isn't even fully staffed, but ACS has been activated and they're operating from their remote conditions. And they knew what repeaters that they were going to do. And the assumption was, even though this was like the first 30 minutes, we staged some scenarios and injects as though they were coming from the hubs, even though that's an artificial time frame. But it helped us practice what's it like to get a message from an outside source and pass it on. As always, with a good exercise, you write your objectives because that's what you're planning to test. And this was their, you know, capability of accuracy, using the ICS 213 that we've all been practicing with. They wanted to use voice. There's been, you know, a lot of our practices has included digital pathways, and so voice as the backup was a key thing. We have some new folks on the ACS team and getting them experience in doing this, and then doing it in a COVID environment, and then finally capturing all of the information, doing a good hot wash so that people could really say, this is what I learned, or this was some areas we need to improve in. This is just the basic information. The only thing was that ACS was using the Columbia Peter in battery mode, so where they were trying to simulate, you know, real conditions that all power is out, and they plan to have a dedicated 800 megahertz talk group established. These were the folks that participated and the days they participated on. So their observations, as we have seen in some of our practice classes, it takes time to do voice messaging. And so the more lengthy and wordy your message is, the longer it takes. And if you jump down to the third one, it was 7 to 17 minutes per message. So if you're trying to get in a whole lot of priority information and you're taking 17 minutes on each one, you really need to look at what is it that was taking that 17 minutes. Is it excess detail not needed? Was it because somebody was going fast to go slow, you know, and making it hard for people? A key observation is really, once you fall into a pattern and rhythm and phrasing, it makes things so much easier, and we all need to practice writing messages that help facilitate that, so that, you know, people get used to transmit 10 words, pause, transmit 10 words, pause, or whatever the optimum is. And then, as we also always find, legibility was a challenge. You just cannot read people's handwriting anymore. Some people have a practice where it helps them organize their thoughts if they jot the notes down first, and others prefer to, you know, do the verbal transcription directly onto the form. And that causes legibility problems when you're trying to listen and write at the same time, whereas when you take notes and then transfer it, you can read it, but you might have lost something in the translation. Continuing, the efficiency was generally increased when you could do directly onto the form, but even if you have them reread it and make sure it's proofed, and they pretend to read it like it's not their own handwriting, you know, they can get some corrections in faster than just having to have somebody walk it back and going, we do not understand what this sentence says. This was a key finding that, and you'll see it show up in the after action, you know, follow-up. They didn't have the radio department talk groups pre-programmed in. And so there was a spurt of activity where OEM had to go borrow some radios to be able to send the messages. Not unlike a real disaster, but we shouldn't have that kind of condition. You know, it's like all our radios need to be programmed to the channels you expect to use. You do not want to have to do that in the field. So, radio traffic going to the fire desk were pretty heavy, and so there was some conflicting with information. And we had a real world disruption, not only at my fire station, you know, with a real fire, but at the EOC. So they had to get out and go. I don't have all the details. Mark can, if he comes on, can tell us later. I'll save him for when we get to the recommendations, if there's any good stories from the end. So the recommendation, they had two. This is the first one. They have practiced, really gotten their WinLink technologies in as a primary means of sending and receiving the messages. But when you have to go to voice, there's a lot of people who are not as practiced in that, and we continue to need to do some exercises on that. And I understand it, the Saturday exercise, or the Saturday ACS meeting, that was everybody get a pencil out, we're going to transmit a message, let's do some practicing. So they're going to build in some more practice opportunities. Oh yeah, here. They did a short training, because that was what I heard about from the meeting. What happened at the meeting? Well, we had to practice writing. And then the second recommendation was about the 800 megahertz radios not having all the right groups. And so making sure as technology changes, as new, you know, decisions are made about technology, making sure the equipment is always ready to be in the right place at the right time. So Mark, is there anything else you would want to add to that?
I just think doing exercises is really good. We've been waiting a long time to really have an opportunity to work with the fire department. It was a real mission that Barb Graff was on, and I'm glad to see that she could help facilitate it before she left. And I think we're off to a good relationship, you know, to do this. I think it was a great opportunity for them to see the community network, that hubs could provide this auxiliary information. And, you know, hopefully it'll be the beginning that we can work this into other exercises and do more, because I think it really gives them another input. So, Penny, I think thought you did a great job going over both exercise descriptions, and thank you so much for doing that. That was great.
Thank you. I'm gonna chug some water here. So my discussion with Cody afterwards, excuse me, was that we don't necessarily have to wait till the next year's annual exercise to do something else, you know, and so the real pacing problem is the COVID. And so what he'd really like to do, you know, is do some discussion around this ahead of time, so that, and maybe do some little mini practices, so that when they do the actual exercise next year, this is like maybe the third year in a row where they've done the windshield exercise, and it's like the first 30 minutes and they practice that part. what he wants to do is get into, and I don't know who asked the question, but what happens when you get into the, oh, more stuff's happening cycle? Oh, stuff's coming in now from the hubs on stuff that is not on the arterials that we didn't know about. And how do they integrate that into their priority responses when they find out, you know, something really big is happening that they weren't even aware of until hour 2? So that's what we would hope to want to practice is the injects coming from citizens reporting stuff to the hubs, and how do we make that connection through ACS to the fire department so that they can, you know, take a standing board, you know, like those boards are all kind of filled out, and start going, oh, here's new news coming in. What are we going to do? So they'd really like to get to that part to practice that, Mark.
And I think they actually gave us the injects. So they kind of gave us the structure they like, which was very similar to those cards you saw. So I guess a thought that we come up with is that it makes sense. We're going to structure our substrata of the ICS 213 to have that, you know, the same pattern, those headings.
Yep.
And I think it's something that we're going to do in ACS for working with that department, but it may be something that you guys could look at as well as kind of restructuring things.
Yeah, well, and what I think this will help us do is finalize, because we've circled around this topic for quite a while, is what is actually on the situation awareness reports that we have talked about in the past. We had to guess at what we thought the fire department would want to know about, and now we know because we can see the card. So we need to sit down with them and go, we've got more stuff on here. Do you want it, or should we take it off, or, you know, make sure we got at least at a minimum of what they want. And then we also, you know, this is fire. The EOC may want additional information because there's other departments than the fire department. They're trying to figure out their responses.
Can I share my screen for 1 second?
Sure, yeah.
I want to show you the 213s that we came up with based on their inputs for this exercise.
Tell me if you're able to, because I don't.
Oh, you got to give me rights. Make me a co-host.
Okay, I think you should have it now.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Nothing spectacular, but as you can see, that's those sub breakout under message: location, condition, injuries, and needs. You know, pretty basic stuff, but it really helps to frame things. You know, that's what we use based on their input. And I think we're going to kind of stick with this. You know, we can do some other things about the nomenclatures up there, the dates, the times, the numbering system, which we need to collaborate on. But I thought it was a good start. I can stop sharing this.
Yep. So what I know from other departments, though, is, for example, Health and Human Services wants to know how many people are going to need shelter.
Yeah.
And then Chad at SPU may want to know something different. So
but that's needs, you know, I mean,
Yep.
But still it breaks out, you know, into location, condition, needs. Injuries is something that's, you know, kind of catastrophic, but, you know, still, you know, I think we can come up with some of these general things that would help structure our work out there in the field.
Exactly. And so what we can do is when it says needs, then we can help ourselves go to, in order to make sure this gets to the department who's going to fill what the need is, a way to say it rather than just go, help, we need help. You know, what is it specifically that it apparently is needed? So it's going to be some really good discussion. I am, like Mark, I'm really happy at the progress that was made and the realization of us knowing how they work and how they collect and transmit their information and how it goes up and over to the EOC. You know, it's just good awareness for us when we do our outreach with citizens and say, this is how the system works, folks. You know, please pack your bag for 2 weeks. So
yeah, I have to excuse myself. I got to get upstairs.
I think we're almost done, though. Is there anybody else who's got other questions? This will be, you know, I'm putting this into a recording, and I know the other hub captains will watch it at the end. So we'll make this another kind of like deep dive next month, you know, for what else have we learned. Hopefully I'll have the after action from the fire department then. So we'll have a little bit of a follow-up, and then we can decide some next steps. Sil, I see you unmuted yourself. Bye, Mark.
Excellent. Thank you.
I was just going to say that it was really helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else got questions? Okay.
I don't think, we don't have a deep dive next month, right? Do I remember that correctly? That our next
oh, yeah, that's
gathering is just a meeting in November.
Right, because they're
Okay,
right up on top of each other, which will probably be good. It'll be December, second week in December, and that'll be, I think I'm going to be out on the road camping.
No,
So I get to learn how to do
I
it.
think it might be the middle of November. We don't have a meeting at the end of October, and then we have a meeting in the middle of November. I
Yeah,
could
it's
be
the
wrong, but
17th. 19th. So our
Okay.
hub captain's meeting is the 19th, right? And
Okay,
then- so we'll do a deep dive the second week in December, which will be the 8th. But
Okay.
I love that we can do Zoom because if I can get an internet, I can do it from anywhere in Montana. So, all right. Thank you everybody for sitting in and asking good questions, because that is what helps the recordings, so that people just, they get the real reaction from people and go, oh, let me think about this. So appreciate everybody tuning in, and I appreciate the power stayed on. All right. Thank you,
was-
everybody.
really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Cindy, before you drop, can I ask a completely unrelated question?